Just a quick heads up before we start. On Sandwiched, we talk honestly about life, loss, and caregiving. That means conversations may touch on topics such as death and grief. We invite you to listen with care, and please do step away if you need to. Welcome to another episode of Sandwiched. I'm Paul Richardson, your host. Today's guest, Lauren Yankoff, knows firsthand what it means to be sandwiched. She supported her dad through Parkinson's, her mom through loss, all while raising kids, building a career, and eventually creating a business that supports women like her. Women caring for aging parents while holding everything else together. Lauren, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Paul. It's great to be here.
So we're going to go ahead and do something a little different. I'm going to do some rapid fire questions. So these are just to get us warmed up, okay? You ready? All right, here we go. What's your favorite sandwich?
Probably a meatball sub. Boy, I didn't think that would be my answer, but it is.
I love it. Morning person or night owl?
Oh, definitely mornings. I've gone to bed at 8 o'clock the last 2 nights.
I am definitely more of a morning person myself, although that has actually been both morning and night recently. Coffee or tea?
Oh, coffee, 100%.
One word that describes your life right now.
Boy, the first word that came to mind when you asked me that was peaceful. I don't know that it actually is, but in a sense, I feel peaceful about where I'm at in my life. So that is the word I would use to describe it.
Yeah.
It's a little chaotic, but I am at peace with where I'm at in my life.
Good. One thing that instantly brings you joy.
My kids. Yeah, my kids, 100%. Man, they are the best. My kids bring me joy.
And I believe you have 2 children. Is that correct?
So I have 2 boys and then 2 bonus kids.
2 bonus kids. Hey, all of us want bonus, right? Fantastic. I love it. So 4 in total. So Lauren, let's go ahead and share a little bit more about you with our audience.
Yeah, I was a single mom. It's funny because you think about it and I say I was doing it on my own. I wasn't. I mean, I had support. I had nannies. I had people who were helping. But eventually I did ask my parents to move down because it became too much. They were up in Montana. My mom finally retired. I think at my urging, actually, if I remember how it went. And I needed that help and support. So I did ask them to move down and come and help.
That's fantastic. And so what part of Montana were they in before they moved to California?
They spent 20 years in Great Falls and then about 20 years in Helena in the state capital. Now, not like the state capital, Sacramento. It's a pretty small little place. But it's beautiful, and Montana is a wonderful place to have grown up and gotten to spend a ton of time there.
That's fantastic. And unbeknownst to probably you and your mother, I think let's talk a little about your dad. I think it was not too long after they moved to be near you, some health situations started to emerge.
Yeah, it's interesting because when they moved, he had some health things going on off and on. But what I would say is that shortly after he was diagnosed with Parkinson's, and I firmly believe he probably had it much longer than he did. But the health systems in Montana, like I said, it's a pretty small town. He was going places, he had, I think, a double hip replacement. He had 2 back surgeries. We were constantly searching for ways to support him. He'd been a lifelong athlete. He was a wrestler in high school and college, went to college on a wrestling scholarship, and then he was a firefighter for 20 years. So he always had such a high level of physicality. So we were always trying to search and help to find ways to minimize the pain. So he'd gone through a lot of surgeries. I do believe he probably had Parkinson's longer than he was diagnosed because upon moving here, getting access to better healthcare in California, his diagnosis came pretty quickly. So he was diagnosed probably in 2017, 2018 with Parkinson's. It's a terrible terrible disease to watch somebody go through, and the
Yeah.
changes in their physicality, especially somebody so athletic and so
Yeah.
mobile. And my dad really wanted to stay active, wanted to continue to do what he did day to day, getting out and walking, and wanted to fish and do all of the things that he always did. And I think the biggest shift that came was during the pandemic, because that really
Mm,
shut down a lot of
yeah.
his ability to be mobile. And I think that was a big transition point for us in his care and his needs, was during that time frame.
That makes a lot of sense. And tell me a little bit about now that he was closer, I imagine it was also easier for you to see the decline and the change. I mean, I'll speak for myself. When I've visited family in other areas, it's sometimes harder to recognize the shift, right? Because it might just be like a good day, a bad day, versus if you're seeing them more consistently. Is that what you experienced or?
Yeah, I would say there were a couple things that were a little
Okay.
nerve-wracking when he was home. He was a woodworker, and he had a wood shop
Oh, okay.
in his
Yep.
garage. I will say we lost a few fingertips while he was up in
Oh no.
Montana, and that was new. So that was a little stressful. So that's why I say I think
Yeah.
he probably had the Parkinson's earlier.
Yeah.
That was a little running joke about him losing a couple of fingertips. But I think that him being close, I remember when they first moved, they moved into an apartment that had stairs, that they were on the
Mm,
second
okay.
level, and they had indoor stairs. And I was just so nervous about the stairs, like to the point where I was like, we can't, like, they were there maybe a few months, and I was like, he cannot keep going up and down these stairs. But it had a garage that he moved all his woodworking stuff into. And there were so many conversations I had with him and my mom. I'm like, I don't think this is our safest
Yeah.
option. So I think they were in that for maybe 9 months, maybe a year, and we got them into at least a ground level apartment. And that was one of the big shifts, right? Of having to kind of step in and say, this probably isn't our best idea. And I remember he had to sell off all of his woodworking equipment
Mm,
at that time. And that was a really hard adjustment for him, because it brought him, when you talk about bringing joy, like that brought
yeah.
him joy. He loved to do that. So, that was kind of one of the first shifts we had to make from a safety perspective, and having him give up something that he really loved.
That is very difficult, and I want to be mindful, but I want to lean into a little bit of silliness with it too, because I think sometimes, at least for me, I feel like in these difficult moments, maybe not in the moment, but at least later, we have to find a little bit of silliness in things. I think your father gave a whole new meaning to he worked his fingers to the bone.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. I don't know if
I
you'd
mean,
see it that way, but oh,
Of course not. And I only leaned in because you brought a little joy and laughter to it, and so I just wanted to. It's difficult. It's hard. It's scary. I mean, I totally understand. I stairs can be very scary. I mean, woodworking tools, absolutely saws and drills and all of it. So I'm glad it was nothing worse. Not to diminish losing fingertips because that's not great. But
not a problem. My boys are always like, I don't think Papa should be in the garage.
yeah.
They're like, maybe not a good idea.
yeah. So as you and your mother were starting to see some of this shift and receiving a diagnosis, where did you even start first? Like, was there a place where like, okay, what do we do now?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I think you're probably familiar, or you've heard this before. Like, you get a diagnosis like Parkinson's, and it's pretty much, here's your diagnosis. We'll see you in 6 months.
Yeah.
And I think that is one of the most frustrating and disappointing aspects of this entire like 6-year journey that we went on, is that there was never really answers around, like, how do you support yourself through this? How do you support your person through this? It was a lot of trying to figure it out on our own, um, where the doctors were helpful was here's medication that will minimize
Yeah.
symptoms, right? I think that has been my biggest aha around the medical system and frustration. It is helpful. It is also exceptionally challenging that is our resolution in so many
Yeah.
situations. Um, so I would say that a lot of what we did was on our own, trying to figure it out. I think my mom found a support group, a Parkinson's support group. That is where she got a lot of her support and information from. Dad went to that for a while he could. But I think that sense of community was the biggest thing that they had. Sometimes that was really productive, and sometimes I would say it wasn't as productive as it could be. But at least they had support and community throughout this that I think was helpful for them.
Yeah, support and community are very difficult without. And so I'm glad that they had it. But I just wanted to circle back, having spent over 20 years in healthcare. So I worked for a large pharmacy organization, but I also worked in hospital administration. It's tough, right? You get a diagnosis, and the diagnosis is like, okay, but there are some treatments that can come with it, right? Okay, great. So here are some medications, maybe here's some physical therapy, here's some activities that you want to do daily, weekly, monthly. But what about the navigating the caregiving journey? The what does that mean as your person, your loved one is going to start to have some loss, maybe in mobility or motor challenges? And it's almost like, hey, like we need a guide for how do I help my person? If you were to go back in that moment, do you think there's one or two things that could have been useful that came with that diagnosis?
So let me share a story about
Yeah, please. Yes.
because, and it's part of why I do what I do now. I remember a conversation with a friend who I worked with at VS, and I'm so grateful for the conversation because I believe it was her mother had Parkinson's, and she was like, there are going to be things that come your way that you won't be prepared for because nobody's going to tell you they're happening. And I was like, well, we have power of attorney, we have a will and a trust, we have a medical directive. And she's like, have you thought about if he wants a feeding tube or not? And I was all,
Mm.
I, well, no. How is that? Like, is that even? She's like, with Parkinson's, they eventually won't be able to feed themselves. So you're going to need to decide if that's something that he wants or not. That's part of a medical directive that they don't always address, right? You're like, if something happens, they don't want their heart to start again. You know that. But I remember thinking, oh man, that wasn't even on my radar. So, yes, from a treatment perspective, but also from like some really difficult conversations that hadn't even come to mind for me that I needed to have with my dad. And, so going back, that's one conversation, one that I'm super grateful somebody had with me. And it's things like that that I'm like, oh, I'm so glad I knew that. Now, going back, I wish somebody had talked to me about what hospice really is, what
Mhm.
palliative care really is, so that I'd known that sooner, because I think we could have accepted different levels of help that would have supported my dad in different ways.
Yeah.
I think from a level of physical therapy and keeping him active to support his journey, I think we probably could have done things differently as well. Because once the pandemic hit, his level of activity stopped, and I know that progressed things, but you don't think about
Yeah.
that stuff in the moment because you're not necessarily super knowledgeable about it. So I think as knowledge is always power, but when you're trying to Google yourself to death, my friend calls it GTS, when you're trying to Google that shit, like you can spend your
Yeah.
whole life in front of a
Hmm.
a computer trying to figure that stuff out. So, yeah, so I think a better understanding of the disease as much as I thought we had a handle on it, better understanding of the different levels of care that we could have, care and help that we could have accepted sooner. And then I really am grateful for some of those conversations that people who had experienced it before me had with me, because I wouldn't have known to have those conversations with my dad. And in the end, some of those conversations were the most supportive that like made a difference towards his end of life.
I'm so grateful that you had that experience where someone who had been or was going through a similar journey who was like, hey, Lauren, here's the things people aren't going to tell you. I think sometimes I'll speak for myself. I'm fearful to share the hard stuff, but as I've matured and I've gotten more comfortable, it's more about the right time. Like maybe not right after the diagnosis of it, like a friend gets a diagnosis, maybe not that moment, but maybe like through time, you can kind of start to peel the onion back, like just dabble gently into, are they ready to hear some of the, here's what's really coming your way so we can get more prepared. I think for me, I'm someone where I'm like, hey, give it to me straight. I can handle it all. For better or for worse, that's not everybody, right? Not all of us can handle that information, but I'm glad that that person saw you and said, look, like I'm going to tell you the realities of what's coming your way, so you can start to get prepared. But I do think that too, if we connect that to the healthcare system, they need to share more of that. They need to bring in a social worker or a psychologist who's that special, who has that kind of that approach to human connection, right? They're coming at it from a slightly different lens where you're like, okay, you've just been given this diagnosis. Now let's have a conversation around how you can start to get prepared and some things to be considering, because you, with your father, it was a 7-year journey, I believe you said.
Yeah, it was about 6, 7. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me about, oh, sorry, please go ahead.
Well, and what I was just going to add on to what you said is in the healthcare system, so often the focus is on the person receiving the care, but it's not always on the person receiving,
Yes.
who's the caregiver. And you said what you said just sparked that for me, because it's usually two people in that room together, right? Oftentimes. And not always, but I think about how different that situation could have been for my parents had it not only been focused on my dad, but focused on my mom too. So, Kathy, how are
Mm-hmm.
you doing? What do you need? What support? But because the questions are always focused on the person who's sick, the level of support isn't always necessarily at the level that it needs to be, because it's about the illness, but not the level of like total family support that's needed. So I think
Mm-hmm.
a shift in that can really make a difference for families if we approached it differently in the healthcare system. I think could really transform things dramatically.
To your point, it really is as simple as, okay, so Wayne, here's the diagnosis. We want to talk through. We're going to do some testing. We're going to test out some medication. And Kathy, how are you doing? What questions do you have? Right. And just that extra, and that probably could have been maybe even just 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes. Right. And I think the reality too is that because Kathy and you are the ones who are going to be with him 23 hours a day, right? Who are the front lines of support, and they need that kind of, how do we navigate this? So I think it's an important call to action. I'm starting to hear a little bit of shifting in the healthcare spaces around that family caregiver support system, and we have a long ways to go. So I hope when we're sitting down having a follow-up conversation, maybe in a year or two, we've seen some incremental progress, but I also know too, we've got a long ways to go. Did you have conversations with your mom pretty quickly after his diagnosis?
Not right away. What I appreciate about my parents is that, and my mom especially, like she really like has her stuff together. So I'm fortunate with that, because I always knew what my parents' wishes, like end of life wishes were, right? So
Yeah.
I'm really fortunate to be in that situation. I knew what their end of life wishes were. I knew like, and I'm an only child, so I knew responsibilities were always going to fall on me. Like there's no question about that. And I have a good relationship with my parents. So I kind of had, the lucky three strikes of all of that kind of being together. So the big things of like knowing what their documents were, knowing that they had those things in place were taken care of. I didn't have to have those conversations. Where the conversations that started to shift was when safety started to be a concern.
Mm,
So that was the first one, getting them into a single level apartment. Then, when I really started to notice both of their health declining significantly, and when I saw just the load of what was happening to her, like
yeah.
she couldn't lift him. She was still trying to lift him,
Oh gosh.
and she had that, I mean, and she was, I'm telling you, my mom is like 5'1" on a good day where she's like real tall. And my dad is he was 5'10", and he was towards the end, he put on a little weight. He was like 200 pounds,
Yeah.
and she was lifting that man
Oh
out of a
gosh.
chair and getting
Sheer
him.
determination, right?
Yeah, like she was doing it, but the how, their living situation was declining, like the house was getting dirtier. She wouldn't accept having
Yeah.
somebody come in because she was embarrassed.
Mm,
Um, and so that was like the next layer is, okay, this is not working anymore and you need help, and we're going to get you into an assisted living place. So that was the next step. Um, so I think those conversations just kind of progressed as like I started to see more and more of what was happening. I think the hard part was that I was still traveling this whole time. So
mm,
it wasn't like I was consistently there. I mean, there was a small brief window with, COVID where our travel shut down with work, where I was around a little bit more frequently. But I mean, that was brief. That was, a very small window. And I think stepping in and having those were not easy conversations. Like she did not want to take help. I think my dad was much more open to it because he saw what
mm.
was happening with my mom. And even my older son would lean in. He was, I think, a junior in high school, and he was leaning into the conversation because he saw what was happening. And, it kind of became a whole family situation for us to have those conversations.
They're uncomfortable. I mean, they're uncomfortable as the child to have that conversation. I think that Parkinson's, dementia, my experience with mental illness, we often role reversal happens. And it's a really uncomfortable situation to kind of go from like, okay, mom, I'm going to speak to you more like a mom. And like, this cannot continue. We have got to do X, Y, or Z in order to make sure you're both okay. And so I do empathize because we don't always know where to start.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we don't. And I think the starting is like, and it's something that I talk to my clients about is like, what's your why, right? Like, what do you
Mm,
want the outcome to be? Because if it's a safety thing, if it's care, if it's whatever it is, like you have to know why you want to have the conversation, what you want your outcome to be, and what is it for your parent, right? Like, why are
yeah.
they holding on? Because if you can figure those things out, it's so much easier to navigate it. Because I think there's a lot of really bad advice out there of having those conversations, right? Like everybody's got an opinion.
Yep.
Everybody's going to tell you how to do it, but only you can figure out what's true for you. And that's, I think, the biggest piece is what's true for you, what's true for your parent, and figuring those things out can help you meet somewhere to get to the right outcome.
Yeah. And it sounds like your father was a little bit more open to it, likely because he's seeing his wife struggle a little bit. Kind of as years have gone through this journey, I imagine you and your mom have had conversations. Did she share maybe where some of the resistance was coming from with you?
Yeah, so actually, I got to ask her that recently because I finally worked up the nerve to talk to her about it. And I think what's really interesting when I asked her, like, why she was so resistant is she said this is going to be a hard one for me. She said, my vows were in sickness and in health, and this was the in sickness part.
Mm.
So she really felt like it was her responsibility to do this on her own and to take care of him, and that she needed to do it, nobody else. That's what she signed up for, and she was going to take care of it. And my mom is legitimately one of the most stubborn people you will ever meet. So when she said it, I'm like, that's really loving and sweet, and also so stubborn of you.
Yeah, yeah. There is an interesting. There's been a bit of a. I've noticed with people who are very stubborn. There's also difficulty in sometimes breaking through that wall a little bit. But I also too, one of the positives, especially in hard situations, is because they are so stubborn. And I'm glad that you stepped in and you helped navigate some of this. But I think also too that also is some of their grit in the drive. Like they push harder, than I can. I think they just push so hard, and that's really what I'm hearing as you're sharing the story about your mom.
She and listen, she was incredible through all of this. And if you ask anybody in my family, they're just like the respect that they have for my mom. My dad comes from a
Yeah.
family of 7 kids, and
Oh, wow.
all of his brothers and sisters have such immense respect for my mom, because of what she did and how she handled it and how she handled my dad. And like, listen, probably have rose-colored glasses with my dad because he was my person, but he wasn't easy either, right? But she just like she really did take her commitment to him very
Yeah.
seriously, right? And they were married for 51 years. They had, like, I am so appreciative of the example of their relationship that they had. And she very much it was her responsibility and commitment. And how I look at that is like, we both wanted the same thing for my dad. We wanted him to be taken care of. We love him very much. We just had a different view on it, right?
Yeah.
We were just coming from different places on how to do that. And I think the biggest thing in hindsight that I have of this whole thing, I always thought that I was helping to care for my dad. Really, what I was doing though was caring for my mom.
Yes.
Everything that I was doing was like, yes, it was making things better for my dad, but what I was watching with my mom was so hard on her. And
Yeah.
if I had not stepped in, it would have gotten harder and harder, and her health would have taken such a toll. And it did. Like it was
Yeah.
hard, but it was really about helping her.
That's such a great angle. And there's a statistic out there that they test that there's lots of data around with the family caregiver, the primary family caregiver. And there's a couple of things that are really uncomfortable and maybe a little scary. But with some of these more difficult diagnoses, the family caregiver, the first one, like kind of the primary, is often, I think it's about 55% of the time, they actually end up passing before the person who has a disease state, right? And so that's something really to be considered. And the other thing too is that they say on average it shouldn't be more than 5 years. 5 years is kind of the mark that the average person can truly be a primary caregiver. And so I think that what I want to talk through is, I believe you talked about assisted living, and I kind of want to navigate like what were kind of the next stages from apartment into as your father's health progressed. What did that look like for both of your parents?
let me walk through kind of where we were at. My parents transitioned into the assisted living from where they were. And I'm going to be honest, everything blurs probably after they got there because his disease progressed pretty quickly. I was traveling nonstop. I had one in middle school, I had one in high school. And it was actually, I think that was when we were in COVID. So it was like crazy town, right? Like it was
Wow. Yeah.
like nonstop because in my time, so long story short, my timeline's very messed up. And I would say for anybody who's gone through anything like this, their timeline's probably messed up too. Like you can't remember a lot because you're just surviving through all of this. What I would say though is that time in assisted living was helpful for them because it did ease up so much on my mom. Like it took the pressure off of a lot of things, right? The med management, housekeeping, meal prep, things of that nature. Like all of that kind of pressure was released, and she could really just focus on my dad. So that decision, once they were there, I think was so important. Now, getting them there was walking my mom through the financial piece of it because she was so concerned that they weren't going to have enough money to do it.
Yeah.
So once we could walk through and help her see that it was going to be okay, they were still going to have enough, like everything was going to be fine, then it was much easier for them because I think the financial pressures for so many people are so significant and it's not cheap. I mean, on average in the US, it's over $10,000 a month for assisted living. That is significant for people. Um, I think once we figured that out though, and luckily these are two blue collar people who had phenomenal pensions and that's not everybody's story, but I
Yeah.
always laugh. I'm like, I think you make more money in retirement than you did when you were
Yeah.
working. So good job, those blue collar jobs pay off somehow. But that I think really helped, right? Like lightening the load. She could really just focus on my dad and what he needed and their relationship. But my dad started to have trouble with like feeding himself, things like that.
Mm.
And towards the end of 22, he started to have some issues with like the fire department got called in because he was, having some things going on. And then one night, my son and I were at a football game in December, and my mom was at the hospital with him. And he had been admitted with pneumonia. That was kind of the start of the end of his life, was that admittance into the hospital. And I remember that when the attending physician talked to us, I think it was 2 days later, because it was a weekend, that they recommended hospice for him. And so it felt very
Yeah.
fast.
Very
And
compressed. Yeah.
yeah, really, really fast. Because I was like, well, he was just fine a month ago. Like, what's going on that you would recommend hospice? And we were really resistant to it. We did not want to accept hospice at that time. So we took him to skilled nursing. We wanted him to get better. But when he was in skilled nursing, I really started to soul search, and my mom did too. And we decided to look into hospice. And that's where, going back to our initial conversation, really understand. I wish I had better understood what hospice was because I think we would
Yeah.
have accepted it sooner for him, even before his hospitalization. Because what I realize now is just the quality of life that it could have provided him, versus how short that was for him. Because hospice services are just exceptional. They really are.
They are. Yeah. And they really know. One of the things that I think that for our listeners who I think there's a bit of a stigma around hospice, right? I feel like most humans, most of us think hospice and go right to death. And while that's often involved, that is not in every case. And it can be a very, it can be 6 months or even a year potentially that they're helping to support the family. But I think one of the most beautiful things about the humans that work in hospice are some amazing people, and they are fantastic. And they also are there. What I love about hospice is they do a really great job, from my experience, of supporting not just the person who is there, but the people around them, the spouse, the children, the caregivers. It's really kind of that they come together and put a circle around the individual to say, we're going to talk through what all of these things mean, and we're going to make decisions together, and we're going to have conversations. And I'm sure that there are horror stories like everything else, but in general, I agree. I think that it's really important. And I think you talked about palliative care as well. Learn more, because these are great resources. And I love that you can kind of reflect on the past experience and that you're sharing it with our listeners. That's fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes such a difference, right? To accept those things, I think, sooner rather than later, and be resistant to it. The other piece that came with that, though, is his level of care that he did need at that time. He had to move into a higher level of care. He couldn't go back to the facility that my mom and he were at. So even though he was on hospice, he needed more. He needed a double lift. He just was so immobile. So they weren't able to support him at the assisted living that he was in. So we had to move him out of skilled nursing into a different facility. At that time, my mom found a board and care 6-bed house that she wanted him in. And I had been traveling and didn't go with her to find this, unfortunately. And when I went to visit him once he was there, I was very concerned with the level of care that he was being provided and how they were moving him. They were lifting him up by his arms. I was immediately like, this is not okay. We got to get him out of here. I'm sure they were fine with other people, but with my dad and his size and whatnot, it was just not a good situation for him to be in. So I talked with my mom. I know why she wanted him there, but I think I was still in a place and she was still in a place where we were hopeful that he would still, be okay for a while. And based on what everybody was saying, even though we were transitioning him to hospice, that he would be okay for a while. So we wanted him to obviously have better care. And what they had initially told us in this place was not transpiring the way they had told us it would. So we moved him again. And so I think that, again, like you talk about hindsight, I think being really clear on when you are looking for a place, knowing what you need for your person, right? So like the level of care that he needed was very high, and that should have been our first priority, was that the care he was going to get was acceptable regardless of anything else. And so that's one of the things I always talk with my clients about. Like, you need to know what's most important to you and be willing to really dig when you go somewhere to ensure that is what you're getting. So we did mess that up. And I think that also kind of sped up his passing a little bit, because multiple moves when you're towards that end of life is very difficult.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a few things. One, I just want to say, we aren't trained for this. This is, yes, there are experts, right? I'm sure, hospice nurses, death doulas, healthcare workers might have more hands-on training. But even I've talked to healthcare workers, once it's your own people, it is completely different. All bets are off. And so I just wanted to, say to you and your mom, like, you two did the best you could with the tools and the knowledge you had, right? I have my own regrets with my situations, with my family, my grandparents. My mom is still alive. She's with mental illness. Like, there are mistakes that we all make, but we are human. And this is not something like we all were like, okay, and here's your handbook. right? Here's your handbook of how to handle this journey. Although the goal of Sandwich is a little bit of bringing stories like yours to people so that they can start to have like, oh, wow, what a really helpful piece of information. So I just wanted to say, like, to you and to your mom, it's okay to reflect, but I do hope that you have found peace with you did the best that you could.
This episode of Sandwich is brought to you by Tumbleweed. If you've ever felt like caregiving is overwhelming, trying to manage all the paperwork, decisions, and emotions all at once, that's exactly why Tumbleweed was built. Tumbleweed helps families get organized and stay connected around what matters most: your loved one's wishes, their important documents, and all the stories and memories that deserve to be remembered. And now, they recently launched CC, your care coach in your pocket, which is an AI guide that offers support, reminders, and gentle check-ins when you need them most. CC helps make sense of what's next, one step at a time. Because caregiving shouldn't have to feel like you're doing it all alone. To learn more or start your journey today, go to tumbleweedplan.com. That's tumbleweedplan, PLAN.com, and click Get Started. Now back to the show.
You know, I think you talked about GTS. Google that shit. But I think that that's at least a place to start. But we don't even know the right questions to ask. That's the problem. It's like, what are the words? What is because you're like, okay, my dad has Parkinson's. What do I do next? And to your point, there's so much noise, okay, I could go to a caregiver support group, but maybe that's not for me. I could find this app that was built to support family caregivers for dementia. And I think you'd have to do a little bit of testing for each of us. But I think it's even just like, what are the right words to ask? Where do I go? What do I do next?
Absolutely. It's so funny that you say that. My son was doing a project last night and he was trying to he was using chat, and I was like, oh, it's garbage in, garbage out, buddy.
Yes. The prompting is key. Yes.
And I think that it's so true, right? Because there are, like, I look at myself in this role as a guide, right? And also the biggest thing I can do, and I'll say this again, is help you to trust your intuition. And I can offer you things. I'm not going to tell you what to do. And there are people who are probably like, no, I'm coming to you because I want you to tell me what to do. But that's not, like, I don't want to tell you what to do, because it's about trusting yourself. And then, yes, I can offer you resources. I've built an army of like people who are out there who do this, and I can point you in the right direction, and I can offer you those resources as a consultant. But so much of this work for women, especially, and also for men, yes, and you're an example of that. But I think for women, it was funny. I read this article, and this woman called it a club sandwich for women.
Yeah.
Because I was like, oh, I like that, because we have like this added layer of bullshit in there for us.
Yep. Yes, you do. You do.
Like,
yeah.
That is a great description. But even just today, I was talking to someone and she's like, I want to maintain my career. I have this high level of burnout, and then I have my dad over here that I have to figure out how to do make all the decisions for. And it's like, that's the work. How do we help you maintain or grow your career, navigate through all that burnout so that you're not adding more onto yourself? Because if you can't do that. And then how do we help you make really solid decisions based on what's most important for you in the caregiving space? And that is a lot to navigate. So that, like, club sandwich,
there's a lot of layers in there.
I'm like, whoa, it is.
Yes.
It's a lot to deal with.
And I definitely, I am someone who wants to always show recognition for, I'm a bit of an anomaly, at least in what we're finding, right? Even the data in what we're building at Tumbleweed is, it's about 85% of women who do the lion's share of this work. And I imagine part of it is culture, part of it is history, part of it is the women are the caregivers for the children. So of course they'd be the caregivers for our aging population. When women were more staying at home, it was like, the kids are already older, so now you've got more free time. Like, I think there's just a lot of assumptions around the space. And that's going to change, and it's going to have to change. 1 in 4 people are caring for an aging person right now. It's going to be 1 in 3 in the next decade. Well, guess what? There is not enough women who can do all of this work. And so we've got to find a way to get more men involved. And I think that it's different and it's going to be uncomfortable. And I think there are actually a lot of men who are doing it. They just might not be talking about it. But I did want to showcase and support that, yes, you are absolutely correct. I look at all of my female counterparts and I'm just amazed, because you're right. There's a lot of other expectations that are kind of squeezed into the sandwich that give additional layers, that it's just like, oh, well, this is easy. You know how to do it. Like, just do it.
That's the thing right there. Yeah, you do it. We make it look easy, right? And
Yes.
we also put that expectation on ourselves, though. And I think
Yes.
that's part of the work,
Yeah.
right? Like, we don't have to do it. We can do things differently if we choose to. And I think that's a lot of the work too, is like letting go of some of that stuff and realizing that there are other people just as capable to do that along the way. And I think, as we talk about like living our best lives, right? I look at like this life that I've stepped into, and half of that is having a great partner in my life who I can lean on now, and who we do things a little differently, but you know what? He's great and he does a lot. And I never had that before. And so I think there's also like, I don't need him to do it my way. He can do it his way. And letting go of that need for it to be just a certain way, I think we can also free ourselves up as women too.
Yeah, I think that is so true. And I think and I think that's great for all relationships. Whatever the makeup looks like is, when humans come together, it's very rare that we all think and do the things the same. Gosh, so many wonderful things, Lauren. There are so many additional questions that I have and things that I want to lean into, but we could stay here for hours, or we could think about what's most important, to our listeners right now, and how we can really give them the support that they're looking for. And so I wanted to kind of circle back to your dad and even a little bit to your mom. You said losing your dad really reshaped how you make decisions for yourself and for your family. What are some of the biggest shifts that you've made since your dad's passing?
I think the biggest shift is obviously leaving my corporate career behind, starting my own business. But really, the driver behind that is both the work that I do and wanting to help people, but also wanting to be more present, have a more present life. I traveled for over 20 years. And that was for my oldest son's entire life. I mean, he genuinely does not know a time where I wasn't on the road. And he has graduated and moved to Colorado. And I missed out on a lot with him. And I have, 2 years, 3 now, that I was home with my oldest son. And I don't want to do that for those last 3 years. So for me, it's really about presence. Like, connection is something that I had missing for a large chunk of my adult life. And I always told myself, like, I'm an only child. I have a big job. There's only a few of us. So I'm just not going to have that in my life. And I think also I'm probably much more gentle on myself from like a compassion perspective, right? Like, I don't have to prove myself. I always was like on this hamster wheel of proving. And my job and my title and my income and that was how I proved my worth. And I really don't feel like I have to do that anymore. And I don't feel like I have to constantly get up and have a morning routine and have an evening routine and do all the things. Like, you know what? I just really want to listen to my body and rest. And that's good enough right now. Like, that's good enough.
That is good enough. That is enough. I'm glad that you are being more gentle with yourself, because even what you shared with the story of the 20 years of traveling, you were a single mom. You were growing in your career. You created a wonderful life for you and your kids, right? And your family. And there's give and take in everything. And so I just wanted to remind you to be gentle with yourself, because you did the best and you found that actually there's a different life for you now and you're leaning in a little bit different. But at the end of the day, we're just doing our best.
So true. We are all just doing our best. Oh, it was a delight to talk with you. And thank you for your work as well. I mean, I just think the more people we can have in this space
Yes.
talking about this and normalizing the conversation, nobody should feel alone in this. It is something that will eventually happen to all of us. So,
and there was a quote that I saw recently, and I think it's probably used pretty common, but I love it. It was, you're either going to be a caregiver, are a caregiver, or will be cared for. So we're all touched by this, It's just, what stage are we in?
that's right.
Well, Lauren, thank you so much, and have a great day, and we'll talk soon.
Sounds great. Thank you, Paul.
This has been another episode of Sandwiched. Look forward to seeing you next Friday, 7 a.m. Central Time. Thank you.
Sandwiched is a Second Act studio production with production support by Brennan Plank and the Tumbleweed team. We thank Tumbleweed for their support. And remember, we are better together. See you next week.